And one of the projects that we were working on was the Verb campaign. I'm not sure if you remember that, but it was like a multimedia kind of, media driven campaign that involved like Venus and Serena Williams. This is around 2005. Mia Hamm, soccer, and basically Verb was like, it's what you do. It's getting kids 9 to 13 more active to combat childhood obesity. And I remember we ran through all the evaluations, all the research, all that kind of good stuff. And we presented the report like it's working. Parents are getting excited to get their kids out and about. And then the funding got pulled from it. And that was it. And I was like, what? Isn't this what we're supposed to be doing? Like, why is this going? Why is this not going? It's like, oh, that's just how it is. I was like, okay, that's a problem. And so I just want to give that example of the archaic kind of piece. Like, if something's actually happening, why did the funding get pulled, right? And so we can get into like a lot of the shadowy murkiness about prevention and public health and like, its effectiveness. But, that's a big part of what shifted gears for me, is trying to find stuff that actually worked for the long haul.
This is the Public Health Millennial Career Stories podcast, where you'll hear about diverse career stories, career strategies, get tips, and learn from others to help you in your public health career journey. If you want to learn about public health careers, or just hear public health stories, stay tuned because you won't want to miss this. Welcome to the Public Health Millennial Career Stories podcast, episode number 47. Hi everyone, Omari Richards here. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you're a new listener, I appreciate you, and you're definitely in for a great episode. If you're an old listener, I appreciate you. Make sure that you're subscribed, you leave a review, you like this video, and you share it with a friend. I greatly appreciate it. I'm excited to bring you all this story today. It's a lot different than a typical public health story, I would say, in my opinion, and I'm interested in getting more acquainted with people in this kind of realm of public health. So I look forward to sharing the story and sharing more stories going forward. Hope you all are doing well. Without further ado, here's today's episode. Enjoy. Today, our guest is the founder and CEO of Onboard Health, a specialized executive search and advisory firm focused on creating a more inclusive future of health. A pioneering strategist with deep ties across the healthcare innovation, startup, and digital strategy landscape. He is dedicating to building the future of health through an equity lens. His work and insights have been featured in Forbes, Fortune, NPR, US News, and World Report. He was recently named the Fortune Magazine 2020 40 Under 40 in Healthcare. We have André Blackman. Welcome to the show, André.
Thank you so very much, Omari. I'm extremely excited to be here and to talk to you today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Like I'm excited to connect with you in person soon. I know that you're in North Carolina, and I know that you have a lot of insights that people in public health generally just don't think about. So I'm just really excited to make this connection and continue to build this relationship. So how have you been? Yeah, of course. How have you been doing, and how have you been coping during these times?
Oh, that's a whole podcast in itself. But for the most part, I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thankfully, family is safe and healthy. And to be completely honest, these past, I feel like we're in month like 16 of 2020, but I feel like the past year or so has really been transformative for me. And so, from a work perspective, also personal, and just kind of vision perspective. So doing well, really optimistic, and excited for what's next.
Okay. Yeah, that's great to hear. That's great to hear. So tell me, how do you identify, and then tell us a little bit about your personal background?
Yeah, identify, he, him, his, and a Black male, in in America, figuring things out. And but once again, like I said, very excited and hopeful for the changes that we're seeing right in front of us.
Okay, awesome. And I know you have some Caribbean heritage in you. Didn't you just share a little bit about that?
Yes, sir. first gen. Parents are from, my mom's from Trinidad, my father's from Jamaica, and it's an interesting combination in itself, right? So I got kind of lots of different things going on in my DNA, but that is continually, and even today, just shaping a lot of my network, my relationships, and it's just always great to connect with people in this space. I actually have a WhatsApp group that I'm a part of that's full of Trinis who are in the diversity, equity, inclusion space, who are leaders. And I'm finding that part about my identity even more robust and rewarding right now, for sure.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome that you're doing that, and yeah, thanks for sharing that. So, before
Yeah.
we dive into the story, what does public health mean to you?
Public health means to me the discipline and the perspectives on what keeps us healthy, what prevents us from being sick. But it also has to do, obviously, with those nuances on what happens, primarily outside of hospital walls. That kind of builds our wellness and healthy lifestyles. So I think that's kind of what public health means to me, especially right now.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's just always good to hear people highlight that it's what happens outside of hospital walls and healthcare for the most part, because it
Yep.
is. And so you got your Bachelors of Science in Public and Community Health at the University of Maryland, College Park. So tell me a little bit about the process of going into to school there and getting this degree.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good story. Really grew up, geeking out on science and technology. My mom made sure I had the chemistry sets, made sure I didn't burn down the house. And for me, it was just the whole aspect of being able to understand how things work. Was definitely something that was always there as a kid. So even in high school, growing up in Maryland in the Silver Spring area, being able to be exposed to a number of different programs. And my mom was adamant around opening doors, as most, West Indian parents are about education. But, my trajectory really got started, when I was around, in the 11th grade, jumped into the George Washington University Science and Engineering Apprentice Program, worked at Walter Reed, did forensic toxicology, worked at NASA during my senior year in high school in Greenbelt, Maryland. And that's what really was charting a course for me in the aerospace engineering landscape. And so I went to Maryland actually because they're one of the top schools around aerospace because of their proximity to NASA. And thought that was my goal: work on the International Space Station, all that kind of good stuff. But probably around in my freshman year, I took an elective course. I'm sorry, in my sophomore year, I took an elective course that led me into public health and the health kind of education division, and that's when I started learning about a number of different things. And one elective course led by Dr. Donna Howard really just kind of shifted my perspective on these, and the class really touched on the basics of public health. And so what I learned there was that there was a point around kind of like the 1990s, late 1990s, where tuberculosis was coming back, but also adversely affecting the African American community. And so for me, like, I'm still in engineering mode, right? So I'm trying to think, like, didn't we get rid of tuberculosis like 5,000 years ago? Like, why is that still a thing? But more importantly, like, why is it affecting this particular group of people? And that's what really kind of led me into the public health world. Before I switched my major, I did pre-med, because as like once again, Caribbean parents, like, public health, no, doctor is I think what you're trying to say, doctor, right? So went into pre-med, and at that time, Ben Carson was a big hero of mine, growing up, and I read his book, Think Big and Gifted Hands, when I was a kid. And so I was like, okay, I'll become a doctor. That's how you really impact health. Did some job shadowing, was very taken back by what happens behind the scenes, as a doctor and in kind of Western medicine. And I was like, that's not, I don't think what I want to do. What makes more sense is to prevent large groups of people from getting sick in the first place. And that's what really kind of pulled me into public health.
Okay, and that is a quite fascinating story, Beat, and that's awesome that you got to get all those experiences in high school, going to NASA, and all those things. And I feel like I haven't heard anyone say that they switched from engineering into public health. So you're the first to say that.
Yep.
What were those things that you saw in the healthcare system, or like being a doctor when you shadowed that didn't resonate with you wanting to make and impact health?
Yeah, I mean, one job shadowing experience had to do with probably a man, probably around in his kind of mid 40s, who was like obviously depressed and downtrodden for whatever reason. And so kind of in some of the intake, conversations, it was very apparent that he had some stuff going on in his life that was also adversely affecting his health. But for me, like, the doctor was just like, look, like we can't be people's kind of like life coaches or whatever here, right? Like we're actually looking at specific things. And that's what medicine here in the United States is all about, like acute care, right? And so, if you're sick, we have a problem for that. If you're experiencing a horrific life, experience, like there's other people for that, right? But to me, that started me thinking about like, okay, what are the other factors that have to do with this? Because in my head, and very being still young and thinking about problems, it occurred to me that if we don't understand what's actually happening in his life, then what's going to happen, right? He's going to be back, and that's what we saw across the board, right? Why things are now focused on value-based care and healthcare and medicine, but that's one of the things that really kind of turned me off from it, because I didn't really see the need to pump him full of drugs and then send him home, and then if things are still wrong. So that's one of the kind of things that I really remember about understanding about medicine, and not getting to the root cause of things.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that is definitely the same thing that kind of resonated with me. It's like we're doing this, but then the same kind of people just come back in with the same things because we're not dealing with the actual issues. We're just treating it, and it's the most expensive kind of treatment in any kind of
Right.
ways. It's like there's horrible cost savings that are not implemented in the U.S. healthcare system, which is very interesting to think about. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So, tell me, like, looking back, hindsight on your college career, like, what advice would you give to someone, like, just knowing that you went in knowing that you wanted to do this one thing and then you transition to a completely different thing? Like, what advice or hindsight thoughts do you want to share?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that be just, curious, be very curious. Like this is a time, especially like when you're in college, and even now, I mean, I feel like a dinosaur right now, just kind of looking back and thinking about it. But you have literally all the resources at your disposal to learn and to investigate, to try things out. Um, those kind of opportunities shrink as time goes on, and so for me, one of the key factors was my curiosity of leadership, and just spending time with professors and leaders in the space, finding out what their careers have been like, and then that helps you to get all the data, right? Like we're data people, right, in public health too, to start making informed decisions, but also really knowing that there's multiple pathways in front of you, and so figure things out, experiment, try some things, as well. And this is kind of part of what and I guess we'll have this in the show notes, but this is what I was trying to impart to the students, in 2016 when I gave the commencement address at the School of Public Health at Maryland about what to do as they graduate. We're living in a time where being able to create is is much easier. The barriers to create things, to create a company, to create a newsletter, to create a community, right? Are right in front of us. And so, my advice, especially in the college years, is to, start asking questions about, what if, right? Start looking at, what you actually want to see done in the world, and then go after it from that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I think that especially when we're younger, we have the opportunity to take more risk and we just have the appetite. Well, you should have the appetite to just keep on learning because I feel like there's just so much out there that we don't know. And the more that you know, or the more that you know that you don't know, I think just helps you to shape where you want to go in your path. So that's awesome. So tell
Yeah.
me more about the commencement address that you made in 2016.
Yeah. Oh, that was such a surreal moment, man. I mean, I remember getting the call from the School of Public Health in 2015, asking me if if I was open to giving the commencement address, and so this is was a huge honor just to get the call, and Dr. Bob Gold, who was the very first dean of the School of Public Health at Maryland and has a long legacy, when it was even before it was called the School of Public Health. But him, and Jane, who's then the current dean of the School of Public Health, just kind of gave me a call and said like, hey, are you open to doing this? So my first thought is like, me? I mean, like, I think the previous commencement address was the Surgeon General. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm not sure if I'm the right person, but they reassured me that, we're coming to a time where kind of my career course at that time was so non-traditional, focused on entrepreneurship, focused on innovation and technology. And they wanted that message to be related to the students. And so at that point, it was a no-brainer. And so, that day, I still feel it like in my bones as far as walking up on those stage and looking out to the students, who were going out there, but also being on the stage with the same kind of professors that spoke into my life and helped to educate me on things. It was a really surreal moment, but it was fantastic. And like I was saying before, my main thing was to do. My main intent was to make sure that they knew that the world was right in front of them, but it was also open for their creation, right? For them to create things. And so those are kind of the main tenets, was to go out and travel, see how people live, how they work, how they play. Behavioral psychology was really hot at that point, as we were seeing the intersection of the social determinants of health, public health, now intersecting with medicine and healthcare, and seeing that opportunity as being ripe for, hey, like, what do you want to see done? Build something, like jump into a startup, because experience is the thing that clarifies everything, right? And so, not that there's, not a time for thinking and learning, but there's no substitute for building something and just kind of being the crucible of stuff related to that. So that was an amazing time for me, and it really clarified a lot of stuff that set the course for where I'm at now.
Okay, yeah, that is awesome. That's a big congratulations to you, I should say, just because that's a big accomplishment in your life to get called for a commencement speech, especially when
You,
the year
sir.
before as a Surgeon General.
Right.
That is impressive,
Exactly.
but I think it goes to show like they wanted you because you had a non-traditional path. And I think so many people, when they go to school and they're just thinking about this one way of doing things. And I think as we look back on the world and where it is right now, the way that people have done things has not brought us to the best that we could be, not even close to where we could be. So I feel like we just need to continue to blaze new paths and try new things. And so I love that you mentioned that, and that was it. That was the thing that resonated most. You also mentioned that you were pushing like entrepreneurship, like during your bachelor's when you were in school. Were you an entrepreneur? Were you having those thoughts or anything like that?
That's a great question. Short answer, no. What I think was the precursor to that was action and activity, right? So at Maryland, anything that I do, like I'm going to learn as much as possible about it. So when I switched my major, what's public health? What's community health? Who are the key players in health education? Who can I reach out to? And, like there's a lot of that kind of, overachieving energy, as I'm sure you're very familiar with. But there was not a lot of, we didn't have people, being entrepreneurs or being innovators in public health. It was literally, your course was NIH or CDC or maybe some of these kind of contracting vehicles, and that was about it. But what I did get a spark for is just kind of being around individuals where things were getting done. And so student liaison at APHA, I think in 2004. And just kind of going to organizations where I felt leadership was taking place for this industry and wanted to be a big part of it. So there's a little bit of that kind of precursor around, like, I want to be where the action is. I want to be where things are being designed and created. And then shortly after, I started just kind of creating and writing things, and that's actually what led to this pathway.
Okay, awesome. So I know you wanted to talk about your position as a principal strategist at Pulse and Signal, but before we get into that, can you just talk about the pathway from you graduating to get into this thing just shortly? Or...
Yeah, no, that's a great segue. Shortly after graduating, Maryland, dove right into working at the American Institutes for Research and looking at health communications. I thought that was a great pathway in order to change people's minds around healthy lifestyles and health initiatives. And then, this is when social media was starting to get hot. So 2007 is when I started blogging. And that's when Pulse and Signal came out. I first started the blog. I tried to be really, really cool with it. So I called it antibio.tech or antibio. It was a playoff of like antibiotic, right? And so I thought I was doing something, right? Like antibio.tech. And then, as I started writing, about 3 weeks in, I got this email from somebody in Brussels. They were saying like, this is a great blog, but like, what do you have against the biotech industry? And I was like, huh? Oh, I'm looking at the word anti-biotech, right? Like, I was like, okay, let me restart. So that's when Pulse and Signal came out, just to play off of like, the Pulse, like heart, health, and then Signal had to do with technology. I thought that was a cool kind of combination. And I started writing about the intersection of technology and social media and digital. And that's what actually started me building a platform for myself in the DC area, the social media club that got started in DC. I was out there all the time, was able to, align with HHS and the White House on a number of initiatives around how social media was, impacting the public health space. So that's how I made a name for myself, really talking about digital strategy, social media, and public health. Started writing, started speaking at conferences about this. And that's kind of like my early transition into, once again, like the day-to-day of like starting a 9 to 5, when you're really young, but when you're ambitious, like it's like, what else can I do? And that's what really started me writing and sharing my thoughts. And that's how that kind of journey started, about like me becoming more visible, me being kind of like a thought leader around technology and social media and health. And, and that started me down that pathway.
Yeah, okay. So were there other people that you saw blogging about health and tech and other things like that? Or what inspired you to just start this?
Yeah. Once again, the short answer was no. Like in 2007, blogging was still fairly early as far as like growing a community. And there were very few people who were talking about health, anything. I remember Patricia Anderson was one of my early kind of connections like on Twitter. So I was on Twitter in 2007 when it first came out. And that's when I started connecting with people around the world who are looking at social marketing, right? And as you and I both know, social marketing is not social media marketing, but it has to do with behavior change and things of that nature. So I got a chance to connect with people in Australia and all around the world who are talking about social marketing and things of that nature, communications, but no one was really kind of talking about technology and social media. So that was another kind of pioneering moment, I guess, for me in Pulse and Signal that really allowed me to start connecting with just incredible people from around the world.
Okay, that's awesome. So I know you've had Pulse and Signal for I think 12 years. So talk me through the development of it from like beginning to what it was at the end.
Yeah, I mean, Pulse and Signal, as I said, started as a blog, and then I
Mhm.
turned it into a digital strategy consultancy. Just because of all the speaking and writing that I got to do, I had a number of different clients who were interested in digital strategy, how to use social media to build their, communications practices better, crisis communications, how to build their audience. And so that is actually how I jumped into entrepreneurship or consulting. And once again, that kind of built levels of how I became known in the industry for around innovation and technology and digital strategy and that sort of thing too. So, going from blogging to consulting is obviously a whole different ball game. But I had a number of people that believed in me and that wanted to see me win. One of them, Lygia Ricciardi, who actually was the former director of ONC's kind of health IT division, but she was a consultant in DC for a while and gave me my first contract working alongside RWJF on a couple of communications initiatives. And that's what really kind of pulled me into that space in speaking and traveling and that sort of thing too. So like those Pulse and Signal years were really near and dear to me for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like a really dope experience.
Oh
So
yeah.
how did you go about getting these initial speaking engagements and things like that? Did people reach out to
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, and this goes back into probably like one of our core principles that I want us to just kind of like, reiterate to your audience, right? I mean, once you start putting things out there, right? Like there's a momentum that gets created, especially when you're consistent, right? And so this is one of the things that creates opportunities for you, right? So inbound opportunities come when you're visible, when you're consistent, and when you're sharing value. And so going back to your point, that's one of the things that I was doing. I was putting, companies' names out there, and I was, evaluating certain products and platforms and things of that nature. So, when Social Media Club DC was formed by my friend Larissa Fair, I was, speaking at social media clubs, talking about, public health or healthcare and how social media was being hot, or I was highlighting the Mayo Clinic or some new companies, conferences, things of that nature. So, around this time was when, that first Health 2.0 conference took place, I think in the Bay Area out in San Francisco. And I volunteered. That was my first time going out to San Francisco, and I volunteered. Matthew Holt and Indu Subaya created that conference. And that was a great entry for me to get up close and personal to the entrepreneurs, to the innovators, to the people who are raising venture funding for these kind of companies and things of that nature. And I had my little flip video camera. I'm not sure if you remember the flip video camera. That was like, the precursor to all the iPhone stuff. But I had my little flip video camera, and I was doing interviews with people like Susanna Fox, who at that point was at the Pew Internet Project in DC, leading a lot of the health kind of portfolio. And then she became the CTO at HHS. But that was a time when I was really building community, and people really knew me for kind of, extracting stories and things of that nature around building the future of health. And so that's how those kind of speaking and writing engagements happen. I was just out there hustling and just kind of like interviewing people. And that's what really kind of pulled people in to have me speak some more and talk more as well.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. And did Pulse and Signal build out to be more than just you as a single employee, or how did that work out?
Yeah, it was primarily still me, being kind of like the lead kind of strategist for a lot of the projects. I did partner with a couple different people over the years, and on larger kind of contracts and things of that nature. But primarily it was me, over the years, and just kind of using that to get plugged into bigger opportunities.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And I just love that you're just putting yourself out there. I feel like so many people are just scared to put themselves out there. And I feel like everyone has value to share.
Yep.
It could be small, it could be big value, but you never know unless you put it out there and people like listen to it. And people, I feel like they're just so self-judgmental. And that's one thing that I've had to overcome myself, to just continue to do it and just put it out, because at least one person's gonna get some help from it. And that's all that really matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, and thank you for that, even vulnerability, right? Even back then, I think it was a little bit more comfortable because we didn't have so many options, right? There was not, TikTok and every kind of content creating platform known to man just like constantly out there. So it started as a slow burn, right, in growth. But one of the books I would definitely recommend is Stephen Pressfield's War of Art. And basically it has a lot to do with kind of the creator's journey, or the artist. But basically the artist is expansive to anybody who's going to create something kind of from their mind and put it out there in front of other people to consume or evaluate or review it. And so basically he gets over this concept of the resistance. And the resistance is this kind of thing where and Seth Godin, who's also like really well-known marketer and things of that nature, talks about this thing where there's like a safety that happens when you put something out there, right? The resistance is that thing like right before you hit publish or send, it's like, wait a second, Omari, like this actually isn't that good. Like toss it right now. Like nobody's gonna read it, nobody's gonna listen to it. You're messing up, you're doing all this kind of other stuff. Like just end it right now, stay safe, you know what I'm saying? And you'll be all right. And so it's like that thing that we all have to admit, and it happens to me still a lot. It never goes away. But what you understand to do is, what are the kind of mechanisms and habits that you can have in your like arsenal to kind of get past that, right? And so, that's another kind of podcast for sure. But that's something I'm really passionate about, right? Is like what you're doing here on the podcast. Kudos, right? Because now you're learning, you're connecting with amazing people, and the amazing thing is like you never know where this is going to go, right? I'm already plotting to do a couple things with you already right now, right? And so like you just never know what happens. And that's this whole non-linear approach to living life and building a body of work, is that the more you put things out there, the more you overcome that initial hesitation, the more opportunities that you have. So I didn't mean to go off on that tangent. I'll get off my preacher soapbox, but I mean that's a core thing I want your listeners to really kind of take to heart for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's some key information there. And like I still feel that resistance. And
Yep.
like I would write out an entire post and like delete it sometimes, like forget that.
Yep.
So like I'm glad that I need to read that book first of all. I'm familiar with Seth Godin, but I haven't read War of Art, so I'll definitely have to check that out. So I know like in your story here, you talk a lot about like relationships and how they have helped you. You also mentioned like books. How has like books as well as like educating yourself been a part of your journey?
Yeah. Oh, that's been huge. I would definitely say that I've always been a ravenous learner, and learning from people directly is always kind of a shortcut. And then books are another kind of shortcut that you have packaged up information that you can digest and like learn from, because everything is really kind of tailored to your experience, right? So the more kind of input that you have, the more kind of tools that you have in front of you to figure out like, is this the right path for me? And so that has been really big. I mean, I would say that I talk constantly about networking. I hate using that term, but building relationships has been absolutely key. After my first job out of college, like I never applied to another job. It was always relationships, inviting me to like join a company, things of that nature. And that's what you want to have operating in your life. And so everything compounds, right? Like, especially as you put out value with what you're doing here on the podcast, but the more people you talk to, um, every kind of instance compounds, right? And so you never know who you're going to come across. You never know what resource that you might provide, that somebody says, hey, Omari, actually, I want you to speak at this, global conference because I really appreciate what you do, right? And so that kind of stuff has been absolutely integral to like where I'm at today. Reading books about, there's personal development, the industry that's going on, right? And these constantly, especially as you're being a creator and being a builder, all kind of gives you those ideas to create more and to keep the momentum going. So I always have like a handful of books that I recommend to new grads, to new entrepreneurs, because this is the stuff that really separates you from everyone else, is that kind of time where you do that kind of quiet investing in yourself. And this is one of the things I tell people all the time, like investing in yourself, the ROI, like nobody can touch it. Nobody can touch the ROI of you taking the time to invest in yourself, your education, the community that you're building, all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, that's some key facts there, some key facts.
Yeah.
So going on, so you were at Backstage Capital, which I believe is a venture capital funding firm. So I know people in public health might know what venture capital funding firm is, first of all. So would you like just
Yeah.
talk about that generally?
Yeah. This is kind of in the startup entrepreneurship landscape, right? So there's companies called venture firms that essentially invest in companies to get them going, right? And so they oftentimes, might give you, a certain amount of money in exchange for a percentage, of your company, so that if your company does well and succeed, and ultimately, does an initial public offering or an IPO, then they get kind of money from that. So this is when you hear like people join the stock market or companies going public. That's what that usually means, right? And so these firms basically help to invest in the founders, the founding team, to make sure like, hey, this is actually part of our investment thesis. So there's different themes or categories that venture firms are made up of. There's a lot in the healthcare innovation landscape. And so Backstage Capital has such an incredible story. And I have the book of Arlen Hamilton, who started it. But she started Backstage Capital to really kind of invest in underrepresented founders, or as she calls it, underestimated founders. And so there's a whole lot of statistics around especially Black and brown or female founders that traditionally get a very small percentage of venture funding for their startups. And so there's this whole thing about, do you have what it takes? Do you have the right pedigree? Did you go to the right school, right? And so what Arlen's kind of, vision was to break down a lot of those barriers for a lot of founders that look like you and me, to say like, hey, we believe in you and your idea. and also like we want to invest in just kind of educating you on how to do things well. And so that's definitely a vision I can get behind. And Arlen Hamilton's story is incredible. We can definitely add some resources, in the show notes, but, she's on a mission. And so a couple of years ago, I became a mentor at Backstage Capital for some of their portfolio companies that are focused on health. And so that's just been an incredible journey to support that and be involved.
Okay, that's awesome. So do you, how does that, what do you do as a mentor? Do you like work with like, let's say like 10 different startups and just talk them through and coach them through? Like, what's that process?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I mean, there's startup advisors that are out there. I mean, every kind of relationship looks different. But as a startup mentor, basically, you might have, office hours, like, 1 or 2 times a month, where if you have a specific skill set. So for me, it has to do with, relationship building, marketing communications, strategic communications, that sort of thing, branding, and obviously a knowledge of like the healthcare innovation landscape. And so for me, like that's where I chime in as a mentor, is around storytelling and building the right kind of relationships and connections and that sort of thing. So I have, a handful of people that I work with, and that's how that mentoring program really goes.
Okay. So I know a lot of my listeners are public health people and they might be interested in like healthcare innovation or anything of like something related to innovation that they just don't know about. How would you advise someone who might have like an idea, but they just don't have like it built out? How would you advise them to go forward?
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. And that's literally, and we're going to get into this too, but like that's literally why I started Onboard Health. Not specifically around entrepreneurship, but just to open the doors, open up opportunities to people who are in public health to see like what is the bigger landscape right now, right? So, for those, who are interested in like the startup or the innovation kind of track, like, there's a plenty of resources and people that are out here, really kind of building the future of health, especially from an equity lens, right? And so, you have, accelerators or, and these are companies that are really focused on maybe a specific time accelerating the growth of your company, just kind of, giving you mentoring and resources and, access to investors and things of that nature. So there's a number of those that are out there. I would say to take some time to just kind of look at the landscape. What are the kinds of companies that are out there? So, a couple good quick examples of kind of public health darlings like in the innovation landscape. One would be Omada Health. So OMADA. Omada Health is really focused on chronic disease, type 2 diabetes, more specifically. At least that's how they started out. And it was started by this guy Sean Duffy, who was actually I think a former nurse that went into IDEO. So IDEO is like one of the kind of global design firms that a lot of people know about, human-centered design. And so he came out of that kind of landscape and applied that like coaching, technology, and behavioral health elements to create this company. And basically, he cracked kind of the code around tying this kind of like technology and things of that nature to public health outcomes and really kind of shifting population health in a whole different way. And public health traditionally were like, oh my gosh, like technology, like it's working, like how come we didn't know? And that was a great signal to say like, look, the gatekeepers of traditional public health, like that era is over, right? People who have like life experiences and chronic disease who are saying like, you know what, I'm going to build something that that I see as a solution. And that's what entrepreneurship is just all about. Like you see a problem, you create a solution for it, right? So now we're living in an era where people are jumping out from like the tech industry, design, and saying like, hey, we're actually going to tackle, type 2 diabetes or mental health. Public health, we actually don't know anything about that, but we do know like this is solving an actual public health problem, right? Mm-hmm. And so over the past several years, you've seen this kind of like leap over traditional public health. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that, about like why I jumped out of the traditional landscape, because so much time passes in traditional public health that by the time everybody's like staring and looking at all the different reports or whatever on the shelf and patting themselves on the back for how many letters they have behind their name, we're now looking at a whole age of innovators and entrepreneurs who are saying, oh yeah, y'all can keep doing that. There's still a lot of relevancy around that, but hey, like we actually need to start helping people that are having eating disorders, and that's an actual, company that's tackling that now called Equip Health. They just raised a Series A round. So, there's different levels of like funding and startups. So there's like, pre-seed where you don't have any kind of, direct investment money, but then there's seed, which is usually like a smaller amount of money to kind of get things going. And then Series A is the next one where it's, usually like in the kind of, $5 to like $15 million kind of landscape. But anyways, there's a company that's actually tackling eating disorders, right? And that's something that, no amount of social marketing campaigns and slick ads really has changed the tide on those things. But these companies now are actually building solutions. So, for anybody who's really looking into this landscape, there's a lot of different resources out there. And that's what I've been actively trying to do these past few years with Onboard Health.
Okay, and yeah, that's great to know, great to hear. I feel like you're seeing a lot of things that resonate with me. I feel like public health is very archaic in a lot of the ways that it does stuff, and as like to your point, I feel like we do research on things that we already know, and we just continue to say, okay, this is a problem, it's a bigger problem now, it's a bigger problem now, but no one's really bringing the solutions to do it. And that is kind of like my issue with like research. We put so much money into research, but no one is doing anything to solve the problems that are coming up from this research. So I definitely think we need more public health people in this space, or just getting partnered with people who know those things and can help them bring their public health ideas. Because as we all know, there's a lot that can be fixed in the health realm in this country and across the world. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head, my friend. I mean, I remember like one campaign really switched the gears in my head. Is like when I was getting ready to graduate from Maryland, I was doing an internship at Westat in Rockville, Maryland, and one of the projects that we were working on was the Verb campaign. I'm not sure if you remember that, but it was like a multimedia kind of media-driven campaign that involved like Venus and Serena Williams. This is around 2005. Mia Hamm, soccer, and basically Verb was like, it's what you do. It's getting kids 9 to 13 more active to combat childhood obesity. And I remember we ran through all the evaluations, all the research, all that kind of good stuff, and we presented the report like it's working. Parents are getting excited to get their kids out and about, and then the funding got pulled from it, and that was it. And I was like, what? Isn't this what we're supposed to be doing? Like, why is this going? Why is this not going? It's like, oh, that's just how it is. I was like, okay, that's a problem. And so I just want to give that example of the archaic kind of piece. Like, if something's actually happening, why did the funding get pulled, right? And so we can get into like a lot of the shadowy murkiness about prevention and public health and like, its effectiveness, but that's a big part of what shifted gears for me, is trying to find stuff that actually work for the long haul.
Yeah, definitely. I think sustainability is something that is essential, and having that in your nonprofit, in your business, whatever the case might be, is so essential. And I think it's something that people overlook a lot of the times. Talking about Onboard Health, which you started in January of 2017, where you're the founder and CEO. What was the thought process? I know you shared a little bit about it earlier. What was the thought process for starting this?
Yeah, great question. I mean, everything just really started at the commencement address when I was looking out at the students who were going out into the world, seeing the intersection of public health, social determinants, and healthcare and innovation kind of converging. It starts for me to start thinking about the workforce. Just kind of at that point, still being very plugged into the innovation landscape, seeing a lot of startups and saying like, hey, like y'all need to be a part of this. How do I make that a reality? And so from like a workforce perspective, it only made sense from a lens around diversity, equity, inclusion as well. If we're going to like start building companies that are tackling type 2 diabetes or mental health, right, or food insecurity, right, it only makes sense for the workforce to know all these kind of innovative approaches that are happening and to be represented, right? Like we need more, people that actually, look like the rest of the country and bring their lived experiences and things of that nature to these companies so that the products and the services are actually sustainable, that actually do what they're supposed to be doing, right? A lot of times, a lot of these kind of technology kind of driven companies never actually do the work to understand the communities and the audiences and things of that nature. And so for me, two things happened, during the commencement. I started thinking about the workforce and how it's going to need to look different, more representation, and how it's going to how it's going to need to be equipped better so that, you know, people like we just talked about know about the technology, know about the design thinking kind of space, know about, you know, the kind of companies that are tackling these issues, and then figure out like, you know, is this a pathway for them? And so all that happened, you know, my daughter was born like that December, so I was already not sleeping. And I was like, why not start another company, Andre? And so that's when, you know, Onboard Health got born. I mean, and another quick piece, like right after the commencement address, I went out to the Aspen Ideas Festival. And I was invited as a scholar for their health program. And so the Aspen Institute actually puts on this annual event called the Aspen Ideas Festival. It's usually invite only. People fly out to Aspen, Colorado, which is absolutely beautiful. And it's all this kind of like meeting of the minds, literally from around the globe. So people who are tackling maternal health, like in Zimbabwe and things of that nature, like they all descend on Aspen to just kind of really get inspired, to share ideas, and to, you know, build relationships. And I'll tell you, Omari, like that was the first time I was at an Aspen. The place was so incredibly visually stunning that I felt like my eyes had to adjust to like 4K, you know, vision. But the real big takeaway was like the experience. You know, you're rubbing shoulders with people from literally all over the world who want to make the world a healthier and better place. And I can't express like how much that energy alone shaped like, you know, how I felt about, you know, what's to come, right? Oftentimes in traditional public health, like we're just kind of like laboring heads down, like trying to hope that something actually makes a difference, and not experience these kind of like really, you know, abundance filled like events, you know, where you're inspired and energized. And so after that event and just getting to a chance to have just incredible conversations, I was like, okay, this is the other piece that I want to bring to Onboard Health, is really elevating the experience of people like us who are care about public health. But there's so many grandiose things that are happening. And so all that to say is that's what led to Onboard Health being formed, to essentially help to build a more diverse and inclusive workforce ecosystem to power the future of health. And that's kind of how things got started, starting with the newsletter, some social media, just kind of gathering the community from there, having conversations with companies around their kind of hiring needs and their kind of talent needs. And then, you know, we just kind of kept going from there.
That's awesome. So what has been the progression of the business? How have you seen the business grow, or what has changed, or what have you pivoted from your ideas from starting 2017 to now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So just like any kind of startup, there's a lot of ups and downs. You're kind of building the plane as you're flying. But you know, it's always been a central theme around people and the people that I'm connecting the dots around. This is when social determinants of health was really hot. So people are looking at transportation, food sustainability, mental health, but also chronic disease. And I just love curating content and showcasing like what kind of companies are coming out. And so, you know, one of the companies that is just skyrocketing right now that I was following since the inception is City Block Health, based up in New York. And that would probably be like one of the top companies that I would recommend for people that think like us, that are excited about, you know, tackling, you know, issues related to public health, serving, or you know, addressing underserved populations and things of that nature. And they're doing so with a technology layer and an innovation layer. So they're now kind of in the $1 billion kind of bracket as like a unicorn company, and they're poised to do just incredible work. And so that's what really kind of started the company with Onboard Health, is kind of curating that kind of content, growing the community, and then, you know, putting out like a job board and like getting people to see like what kind of jobs are out there that are building these companies, right? Curating more content, putting together, you know, events, and just once again, just kind of collaborating as well. Actually, for the Aspen Ideas Festival, I brought back out some Onboard Health fellows every year. And so once again, really looking at how to build diversity and inclusion into these kind of events that, you know, are mind blowing, but we need more people to feel that kind of energy, right? And so partnering with the Aspen Institute to do that. And then, you know, over the years, just really kind of getting focused on the business model. And so one story that really kind of shaped things, a little bit, two stories, but in 2019, I went back to the Aspen Ideas Festival and brought a number of Onboard Health community members out there. You know, my friend Carlos Rodarte, who's on our advisory board, Ivelisse Andino, up in the Bronx. She's a CEO of Radical Health. And we actually had like the sunrise mountain hike experience that was absolutely crazy, and that none of us really expected to do. But long story short, we were just so inspired. After that event, I had another just kind of, up leveling of my why for this company. And then shortly after that, I got a call from Dr. Aletha Maybank, who was a former health commissioner of New York City, is now the first chief health equity officer at the American Medical Association. So she heard about what I was doing with Onboard Health. At that point, I wrote an article about why I started Onboard Health. I got picked up in Fortune magazine, and she was like, "I'm building a team at the AMA. I want you to help." And after I picked my jaw up off the floor, because Dr. Letha Maybank is kind of a legend in this space, I got to work. And what that really helped me to crystallize was this focus on senior and executive search, right? If we're really going to be moving the needle on building the future of health, like the leadership has to look different. It needs to be equipped different, right? And so like that's when Onboard Health really pivoted, into executive search for companies that were building the future of health, that really saw the importance of equity and inclusion. And so currently Onboard Health, we're a specialized executive search and talent advisory firm for companies building the future of health. So on one hand, we're doing that, looking at director levels and above all the way to the C-suite. And then we're also actively growing the talent community, that we're about to unveil a couple different things this month with. But it's all about, connect, equip, and launch. Those are the three main pillars of the community. And that's how we've really evolved right now, is growing a community, educating people, once again, just letting them know, hey, these are some pathways, these are some companies that you should look at. They actually have resources. You don't have to eat ramen noodles for the next 15 years, trying to say, hey, I'm doing the public good. Like, nah, we're not about that. We're about business objectives that actually port into making the world a healthier place, right? That's how we build sustainability in, because you and I both know public health can burn you out, right? And I'm not about that life. For anybody that's part of the community, I want you to be thriving. I want you to be, enjoying the work that you're doing, and getting rewarded for it, and seeing that vision play out is really important to me. So that's kind of what we're doing right now. A lot of really cool things are going on, but 2020 was definitely a defining year.
Yeah, and that is some dope stuff you're doing there, and I think it's really important that you're highlighting like getting people into leadership roles of the people of color into leadership roles as they are needed. Like I know I was in a training the other day, and they were talking about sunsetting old leaders, so like
Mm.
all the white people having to accept that they need to step down to give other people, more diverse people, a chance at the table to really take these leadership roles and shape a more diverse outcome or organization, whatever the case might be. So that's really good that you all are doing there. How would someone get, like, if they want to stay updated with what you all are dropping later this month and stuff like that, how would they stay tuned with that?
Yeah, we're actually about to unveil the next iteration of the website this week, as a matter of fact. So if you head on over to onboardhealth.co. There'll be a place to go to sign up for the newsletter that I send out twice a month, that has all those kind of curated resources and things of that nature, and joining our talent directory. So, if you're looking at, getting into amazing roles, that's a way to get plugged in. So, signing up for the newsletter and then, coming on over into our talent network is usually a great way to start. But we're, launching our, Slack community, so that there'll be some real-time engagement with our community and people. There's a lot of dope people in there that are entrepreneurs, leaders at some of the top-notch companies. And there's a representation to it. Like, being seen is so incredibly important right now, especially in this industry. And we're also going to be unveiling the job board. And that'll be a more expansive way for you to see the kind of companies that we're working with, but also the roles that are out there. So everything, if you just go to onboardhealth.co, that's going to be there. I'm also very, very, very active on Twitter. So you can find me at Mind of Andre on Twitter as well.
Okay, awesome. And I'll definitely just start shoving people your way and telling them to get into that talent pool, because you're
Oh
all
yeah.
doing some great things. And I think people just need exposure or the opportunity to get into these kinds of things. So thank you for that. I know you mentioned that you were recently named, or I mentioned that you were recently named the Fortune magazine 2020 40 under 40 in healthcare. So how did this come about, and tell me about that experience?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That was another surreal event. Yeah, 2020 was crazy, Omar. I mean, from George Floyd's murder, that really just kind of like had me questioning a lot of different things about how I'm showing up for this kind of work. It really just kind of was a catalyst for a lot of energy around what I was doing here. But Fortune reached out and said like, hey, we're highlighting people that are just kind of doing incredible work here. And I think look, for the first time, they even expanded, how many people were going to be on the 40 under 40 list because there was so much coming out of 2020. And so, going back to what we talked about, there's that initial, like, are you sure? And then it's like, yes, Andre, like you did the work, but more importantly, like this is a platform for this vision to expand. And so that was incredible. Did a little video for that. But that was really just an incredible experience to see like a lot of the work that I put in over the past 15 or so years, into this space, and then to allow us to say like, hey, we're changing the workforce and the future of health in some big ways. And so that was incredible. Got to meet a lot of amazing other individuals. My friend Dr. Lauren Powell was also on that list. So she's now one of the kind of global leaders at Takeda Pharmaceuticals around diversity, equity, inclusion. She's absolutely incredible. And just a number of other people were on that list that were kind of changing the game in healthcare and health.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's another big accomplishment for you. And like, I'm just glad to have you on the show. And like, I feel like your story is it's just definitely not a traditional public health story. A lot of people in public health, if they go into entrepreneurship, they go into a nonprofit or starting something like that. And I think that though that is good, that is necessary, there is the space and the need for people in public health to go into like these startups, these for-profit businesses where with they're still doing good work, but they're just sustainable and have different like models to get paid and different things like that. So I feel like we need both of them. We need both of them. So
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. I mean, it really boils down to like, what do you want to do? Like, what, I mean, now that there's no specific course to do it. If you're interested in like, preventing people, or improving access to care, there's a whole spectrum of companies that are doing that right now, right? And like to your point, the resources and sustainability, like that's the name of the game, you know. So yeah, that's what we're really excited about right now, and we're rolling out some things. And I definitely still got some book recommendations for the audience, but there's a lot of great energy that's going on these days, and I'm really passionate about making sure that just people know what their options and opportunities are. I mean, the two words that I want synonymous with Onboard Health is access and acceleration. So making sure that there's a fast track for you to understand what's going on in the landscape, and then to plug you in as an active member and an active participant of building this future of health, and then accessing those kind of spaces that traditionally were kind of closed off or reserved as well.
Yeah, and that is essential, and it's definitely needed now, and going into the future. So thank you for that work that you're doing. So where would you like to see yourself in the future?
That's a great question. I think for the next decade, I'm really going to be living out those kind of three tenets of the Onboard Health community, which is connect, equip, and launch. I'm definitely a connector. As we have conversation and I have conversation with candidates and new community members, and this is why I like Mind of Andre is kind of like my my tagline, because I'm always thinking and always connecting the dots. But the connect piece is really just kind of connecting like-minded individuals constantly. I love doing that kind of stuff. Equip really has to do with the resources, the news, the just opening your eyes to like what's actually happening in this industry, and then launching you into incredible opportunities, whether that's a job or conferences, things of that nature, fellowships. That's definitely going to be my body of work for the next decade. Is those kind of three main tenets that all kind of port into building an equitable future of health.
Yeah, and I look forward to seeing that equitable future of health and where Onboard Health and yourself go in this next decade. So I'm excited for that. And I think it's just important to tell like your story, just because some people might be in their MPH or doing their bachelor's right now and thinking about these different things, and they just haven't seen someone in public health do these things, because it's not a typical story. And I feel like I can't even count. I want to see you the only person I know that has gone through like public health training and is doing like this kind of startup innovation tech stuff that I know, and I feel like I need to broaden my connections as well to get into this space and just know what's going on, because I think, as we all know, tech is here to stay, and tech is where the future of everything is.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many different ideas and resources in my head. Like, just to give you like a quick example, then I can talk about some of these book recommendations too. But one of the companies called Blavity. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Blavity, that Morgan DeBon and a couple other people created as a platform for millennial Black people, and just kind of like highlighting excellence across like the tech and entrepreneurship landscape. Morgan started a conference called Afrotech that takes place out in Oakland, California. And I think in 2019 was when Dr. Bernard Tyson passed away, the head of Kaiser Permanente, and he actually spoke on stage at Afrotech with Morgan, talking about the future of health as it relates to tech and innovation. Unfortunately, the very next day was when Dr. Tyson passed away, and that really kind of shook the healthcare landscape. But after that, Afrotech is coming out with an actual one-day health conference as well. And so that's another just kind of example of like culture meets tech meets entrepreneurship, for this kind of work. So we can definitely put that link down there in the chat too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So moving on to the Furious Five, the last,
Yes.
the 5 questions I ask all guests.
Yep.
Number 1, what advice would you give to a student trying to pursue a career in public health?
Figure out what you actually want to do that's related to public health, and then start looking around for those opportunities to get you to do those things. Don't put a framework on anything just yet. Ask questions and talk to people about like what's happening, and that goes into the different kinds of companies that are tackling public health related issues right now. There's opportunities out there.
Awesome. Number 2, if you're talking to someone wanting to get into your position, what advice would you give them?
My position. I would definitely say continue building things, whether that's writing, whether that's speaking. Get comfortable extracting what you have in your head and communicating that to a specific audience. That gets you into the habit, once again, like we talked about, creating more opportunities for yourself.
Awesome. Number 3, what's something you are working on improving in your life right now?
Probably the ability to have downtime. Oftentimes, like when you're on that kind of hamster wheel of work, this is really important for you to kind of reinvest time and energy into yourself and that sort of thing too. So probably that.
Okay. Awesome. I think that's highly important.
Yep.
Number 4, and I know you've been waiting for this one. Professionally, do you recommend anything? Any books that you recommend?
Yes. So I have a couple with me right now. So one book that I would say for anybody is Mindset by Carol Dweck, Dr. Carol Dweck. This book really talks about fixed versus growth mindset. For you to do anything that is, like, once again, like in my position, having a growth mindset really allows you, like, we talked about before. Fixed mindset says like, oh, if I don't think I can do something, I'm not even going to try it because I don't want to be made a fool of. I don't want to fail. Growth mindset means I'm going to figure it out. I might fall, but I'm going to keep going and figure it out. Those are the kind of things that really build your resiliency and career impact. So Mindset by Carol Dweck. It's about damn time. This is Arlen Hamilton's new book. So from Backstage Capital, this is a great primer on entrepreneurship, the startup life, and building companies. I would highly recommend It's About Damn Time. She talks about access, diversity, equity, inclusion, all that kind of good stuff. And then finally, the memo by Minda Hart, specifically focused on women of color in the workplace and careers. Minda is absolutely incredible. And her book, she's actually working on her second book. But once again, navigating career is another piece as well. And finally, another person around career stuff is Letitia Bird. So I'll send over some more information on that too. But she's very focused on empowering kind of your career trajectory as well.
Okay, well, dope. Those are great recommendations. Thank you for sharing those, and I'll definitely have to add them to my reading list as well as just sharing.
Oh yeah.
people. But last but not least, where can people connect with you?
Yes. So once again on Twitter, at Mind of Andre, Andre. That's a great place. Going to onboardhealth.co. We're also on Twitter at Onboard Health. And those are some of the kind of key places to connect. I'm going to be like putting out a lot more content this year for sure, but also through Onboard Health. And so I would say like those are the three kind of key places to connect. And then, send a note to me, Andre at onboardhealth.co. Hoping to hear any kind of thoughts and how it can be helpful.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for all your insights into this world. I'm glad that we were able to connect. I'm glad that I was able to get you on the show today. And I look forward to just having more conversations with you in the future.
Thank you so very much, Omari. I had a fantastic time, and I'm definitely looking forward to some more collaboration.
Yeah, always. Well, I'm really glad that I got to have Andre on today. I think he dropped some really great gems that people in public health probably don't know about venture capital, about startups, and how we need to really get involved in this field and just have our public health perspective portrayed in all these different health innovation and public health innovation types of companies and things. So I think we definitely need to tune in. If you have not, definitely go across to Onboard Health and sign up for their talent pool. And I know I'm about to work on my resume to do that. Just not to say that I'm looking for a new job, but I just think it's invaluable just to keep those connections, keep the gateway open to interviewing, maybe meeting new people, informational interviews, all that different stuff. So I hope that you all took a lot of value from this episode. I was very excited to have this guest and look forward to bringing more guests on and sharing their stories with you all. Public Health Millennial out.